Welcome to the Motoring Podcast, a Scion TC special edition. Hello, I'm Alan.
Hello, I'm Andrew. You can spot that Alan wrote the title for this one. So come on then, Alan. What is a Scion TC?
The literal full name is actually the Scion TC base models. That's it. There is no. It's really just Scion TC because they only offered one model unless it was a special edition. So there, you can take that and stick it, frankly, in a very grown-up fashion.
Come on then, what is the Scion TC and why are we talking about it, Alan?
Well, we're talking about it because I bought one. There we go. That's why. What is it is a far more complicated discussion because, as ever, Alan has bought a Bitzer.
Okay.
As in, it's bits of this car and it's bits of that car. As is the way. In case people have missed it, I am currently in the US of A. And to be in the US of A, I kind of needed a car.
That famously pedestrian-friendly country.
Yes, wonderfully. And, you know, I'm in Massachusetts. It is actually not bad for that. There are terrifyingly bumpy bike lanes. There are all sorts of stuff. There is actually some sort of infrastructure for things other than just cars. There is even a modicum of public transport around here, although it doesn't work wonderfully. Well, it doesn't work wonderfully well at the minute. So anyway, I needed a car because to get from here in my weekly trip to the office, it's about 45 minutes by car, and goodness knows, I don't think it's actually possible to get there any other way.
Okay.
Because it is a little bit out in the sticks. I bought a car. And I was buying a car, or trying to buy a car, in July 2022. And of course, in July 2022, there were no cars.
No, that was difficult, yes.
There were no cars. There were no new cars to be had, to lease or to buy on the Never Never. There were very few used cars. And any that there were, the prices were just skyrocket. I was asked this morning, why didn't I buy a V8 Mustang? I have been asked that so many times. Because you couldn't get a sodding V8 Mustang. And also I didn't want a V8 Mustang because that was too much of a stereotype.
But it would go well with your cowboy hat and boots.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, I set myself a couple of limits on choosing a car in the US. And the first
really,
one...
Alan,
and really,
this is so surprising that you have a list of requirements that is perhaps a little left field.
Well, basically one of them was, don't want something that's sold in Europe. That, by the way, also knocked out the Mustang, because you can buy that in Europe. They're not all that left field. I mean, really, I was aware initially. Well, no, it had to not be available in Europe.
Okay.
So there's no point in coming over here and buying a Mercedes or a BMW because, quite frankly, I don't want to buy a Mercedes or BMW in Europe, and I could have had a much better choice of much better models in Europe. Mm-hmm. So that was completely pointless, I felt. Similarly, very aware of the winters. He says, looking out the window at the snow, the winters and road conditions and stuff over here. I didn't really want 3,000 horsepower rear wheel drive muscle nuttermobile. Not that I could have got one anyway, or not one that you'd want to own or drive safely. And also the last little bit, which really wasn't really a requirement per se, was it had to be something that was going to be relatively reliable. Because, of course, I've just moved across an ocean. I have lost my entire...
support network.
Lost my entire support network, basically. Yeah, I have no support network. Friends over here are not car people. They don't have a support network I can sort of really plumb into.
Yeah.
So I've lost my support network. So it had to be something that was going to be relatively reliable. And so as a result, I chose a car that's 7 years old, where the brand ceased to be 6 years ago, and all sorts of other sensible stuff like that, but which is fundamentally a Toyota. Because for those of you who don't know, Scion, it was Toyota's youth brand. Yeah, I hate saying youth. It always makes me think of Janet Street Porter in early days of Channel 4. It's just never really very, very complimentary.
Hey, you kids are so funky.
Yeah, exactly. The aim of Scion was to bring a sort of Japanese and European style cars to America at a relatively low price point. The idea was that they were targeting younger buyers, or certainly younger drivers.
Okay.
Instead of a used, older, Volkswagen used all the BMW or Mercedes, then they could get pretty much the same features, but modern safety and newness and in most cases relatively good looking cars at a fraction of the price. And that worked quite well as a target, because what was happening was parents would buy their kids a new Scion rather than buying them a used German brand, a used Audi, say. That worked because the cars were, well, we'll come to the sort of speed and handling and all that stuff coming up. But it was generally successful. There was lots of, they did lots of sort of slightly guerrilla marketing techniques, word of mouth. It was launched in 2004, so it was a little bit before the internet was just taking off. But in these days, they would do most of their marketing via social media. Nowadays, you could imagine a modern Scion having a TikTok.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing wouldn't surprise me. And that was, and it worked. The TC itself had the youngest average age, the youngest average buyers of any new car in the US for many years. I think it was something like 27 or 24. And that was the first owner.
Okay.
And that was the average age. TC itself was around for quite a long time. It was first launched in 2004. It was a heavy facelift into 2010. And it finished production in 2016 when Toyota North America discontinued Scion. TC was just about the biggest of them. Most were sort of Yaris, yes, take a drink, platform-based cars. The Toyota Urban Cruiser was sold over here as an I something or other. The IQ was sold as a Scion IA. So, mostly small. We'll talk about size and platforms and stuff in a little bit, rather than going into that nerdiness here. But the TC is slightly larger than a normal hatchback, than a C-Class hatchback in Europe, because reasons, and America. And that was, as I say, about the biggest vehicle. So generally, apart from the very economy-focused Echo and Yaris, then the Scion range sat alongside those cars, less budget and a bit more funky.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons, I guess, why it was a separate brand, to keep the sort of division between the very worthy but very dull Toyota badged cars. The Yaris sedan is not exactly the most exciting thing in the world, not even to me. When I look at it and go, "Oh, that's a bit awful, isn't it?" then it's quite bad. All right. Did I say that for most of its life it was the best-selling Scion? I think I did. 2006 was the best sales year. They almost 80,000 were registered on US roads. Tailed off a bit after that. It was a blip when the facelift was introduced, but certainly the second generation, which is what we're going to talk about, was not quite the sales success of the first generation. And part of that is because the FRS was introduced. The FRS is the forgotten triplet from the GT86, the BRZ, and of course initially it was sold over here as the Scion FRS. Before 2016, closure of Scion, they went and called it the GT86, sold as Toyota over here as well. So TC2 lost out on a lot of sales, partly because of global recessions. Gosh, think of those. Think when the next time we're going to have one of them is. And basically the same manufacturer offering a funkier, cooler car.
Yeah.
For only a couple of thousand more, a few $1,000s more. And of course, if you're buying it on the drip over 5 or 6 years, that adds up to maybe $100 extra a month.
Yeah.
Cut out a couple of lattes and you're sorted. In total, Scion sold 427,571 TCs in the US alone. They also sold it in Canada, and there was a version called the Toyota Zelas, which was sold in Central America, China, Middle East, Africa, and South America. So they'll have made about 500,000 of these. Curiously, for an American-only brand and a vehicle mostly sold in America, it's actually built in Japan.
Oh, right.
I was surprised too. I was expecting it to have a US VIN, but it isn't, and it does say Made in Japan on it.
Okay.
New in 2016, they cost just under $20,000 before delivery tax, dealer BS, and all the other stuff that gets added on here in the US of A, because you never pay the amount that is listed for anything ever. So wonder you don't have to add 20% to tip the salesman, to be perfectly frank. So it probably came in at just about $24,000 new. In July 2022, I paid $14,900 for it before tax, registration, and BS. In total, I paid $16,530, which is a lot of money for an older car with 70,000 miles on the clock. But I'm not bitter or twisted about that in any way, shape, or form.
That's good. That's good.
I'm really bitter and twisted about that. Really, especially now that new cars are available and you see what the monthlies are on the leases and you think, I'd have paid that for an old car. But otherwise, let's move on and talk about the car itself, shall we?
Yeah. Do you want to describe it to us then, please?
Well, I've not really sort of gone there. It is a liftback two-door coupe. It seems terrible I have to point out the fact that it's two doors these days, but that's what marketing departments do to us all. It's got quite a distinctive cab forward silhouette. You could argue that in some ways, in some parts, the first generation is better looking. It's a little bit plainer, but it's a little bit sort of pure, a little bit more Audi TT-ish around the front end. It's not quite Audi TT-ish, but it's a much simpler graphic around the front end and around the rear. Although in other ways, actually, I prefer the rear of this second generation. It is, despite my grumbling and muttering, it's still pretty good looking, and it's definitely not modern car ugly. There is a very limited number of slashes, swoops, and gratuitous crinkles, which is far more than you can say for most new cars coming out around now.
Yeah.
It's got quite weird proportions. So that cab forward stance in a two-door coupe, where normally you'd expect a long bonnet. But that tends to come down to the underpinnings. Despite the fact they sold about 500,000 of these, but that was still over many years of production and 12 years of production. That's not a lot of cars in Toyota terms.
No. The
platform it's based on is the MC platform. That underpinned a whole bunch of vehicles that you will have heard of. First generation Auris, that well-known dynamic vehicle. First generation Avensis, the one built at Burniston. Well, Auris was built at Burniston too. 2 generations of RAV4. And the third generation Prius, as well as the Lexus CT and the Lexus NX. Which means short bonnet, lots of cabin space for its length were almost given. And that whole sort of distance between the firewall and the front axle kind of governs a lot of stuff, really. So those were the kind of hard points. But I think that given what the designers had to work with as regards proportions, I think they've done a pretty dashed good job, actually. I think it's handsome, it's distinctive. It's a nice looking thing. I noticed somebody recently did a quick sort of pencil sketch and said, what is this, by just kind of showing the glass house in the upper part. And I was not the first person to say Scion TC. It is a distinctive shape and distinctive element that no other car has, which is kind of cool.
Where the very front of it, I'm getting hints of the Lexus is it RF?
RC?
Or the RCD sporty
you're thinking
saloon.
RC and RCF.
Yeah, because those headlights are very much that, and the front grille. And I don't mean that disparaging in any way. I quite like the front of that. To be honest,
was of a time. This came first, and then the Corolla over here copied that. There are points of Lexus in there as well. There's all sorts of little bits. As I say, it's a bit of a bitzer.
But that's also part of the reason for having a sub-brand. Is you get to experiment
and play with stuff. Yeah, I think this one had that style of light with the sort of slash coming down from the outer edge of it into the bumper a bit before most other Toyota and most other Lexus. The Toyota Zillas that I mentioned earlier, it was kind of halfway in between the sort of this post facelift and the pre-facelift, which was far more blocky. Around the front, and so it sort of fitted halfway in between, and then I think after the facelift they went for this sort of slightly more Toyota family look around the front anyway. The outside, lots of nice details, indicators in the mirrors, there's complex, good looking headlamps, they work well as well, by the way. Neat profile bumpers. Sadly, they also have Lexus rear lights. I think that was to approach the youth market. But I am prepared to forgive them because the indicators are all amber. I guess that ties back to that Euro look and feel thing. God, I hate red indicators. And what I really hate is the European brands that do it for over here. They do red indicators over here when you know perfectly well that in the rest of the world they're in orange.
I can't wait till he gets onto the number of nuts on his wheels.
I'm not that bad. Not quite. Other cool thing about these is they all have a glass roof. So there's quite a large there's a windscreen, and then there's 2 glass panels in the roof. The first one is like a big sunroof, a decent sized sunroof. It tilts and slides back outside the car. It's good. The back one is fixed in place, obviously, because the other one goes over the top of it. And then, of course, the rear hatch has this very long, like 3 acres of glass in it as well. It looks great because, especially even if they're in lighter colors, it's like having that black roof because it's quite heavily tinted on the top. But inside, it actually makes, which we'll talk about shortly, it actually makes the inside quite light and airy.
Oh, good.
There were colors available. Mm-hmm. Mine is cosmic grey, which isn't really grey. It is a sort of greeny blue, very dark greeny blue metallic. I think it's a really, really nice color.
I think it suits it well, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, despite the name, it's not actually grey. You could have metallic blue, white, silver, black and grey.
Well, actually, some of the names are fantastic.
So there's cosmic grey.
There's cement. There's absolutely red.
Which is just red. It's like a pillar box.
Magnetic grey metallic.
Which is just dark grey.
Blizzard pearl.
White.
Black.
Pearl white. I've not seen a pearl. I've not seen a white one. I don't think I've seen a white one. There's metallic black. They're pretty much all metallics apart from absolutely red, which is just red.
And then blue streak metallic.
It's quite nice.
Yeah, it does look good. It does look good.
It's quite nice. But no, mine is definitely my favorite color. I do really like the color of it. There might be many different finishes of it because history. It is. I mean, it's not as bad as a Mercedes, but it's. Sorry, Chris. But yeah, it's a really nice color.
Okay, then come on, take us to the inside.
Start at the back as usual.
Yep.
The boot is really big. It's not very deep, but it is really big, and the access to it. It's a lift back. You love a fast back. You love that. It means about a third of the car opens up. It really is. It's like something out of You Only Live Twice, and you half expect it to be another smaller spaceship inside it or rocket inside it. There isn't a lot of undercroft space, as there is a space saver and a jack, but there is sort of room in the trays under there for a high-vis, some spare oil, etc. There's cubby holes at the side, which I've got kitchen paper and stuff in, just because I always have that and oil and stuff in my cars because I'm me.
Mm-hmm.
Rear seat splits 60-40. It can accommodate road bike with both wheels on, lying down without any issue. Between there and the back of the front seats. That's quite impressive.
Handy.
One thing I will say, before I move on though from the boot, because it's just a massive boot and really practical to get to. One thing is that you didn't get a luggage cover as standard. That seems to be a thing over here. You don't generally get. I know, exactly. So I found a new old stock one on eBay. It's kind of curious in that it doesn't retract or anything. It is just kind of like a hammock, which studs in between the rear lights at the back, and then there is a kind of hammocky bit at the front. It's a bit of a faff, when you're putting shopping bags in, you've got to undo 2 pop studs. Open up and then put 2 pop studs back out again. It's just like, yes, this wasn't really considered, was it? But given how much glass there is at the back, and it's not heavily tinted or anything, I just didn't want anybody seeing everything that was in my boot.
No,
really,
not at all.
So yeah, I managed to acquire one of those for a whopping $80 or something. But it's a worthwhile addition.
Yep.
Inside generally airy and bright, thanks to that glass roof, which I've said. The glass roof has blinds on it for both. It's got 2, one bigger one little one. A little bit of poking means I've kind of fixed the front one, but they stop it being too much of a greenhouse in the summer. Yeah, kind of. But in the summer, I generally had them closed, and now that it's colder, and certainly during the fall in New England, I had them open quite a lot. It's just nice and, let's say, bright and airy. Rear seats. It has rear seats. They are accessible.
Okay.
Unusual for a car of mine.
I was going to say, this is not the usual standard we expect from Alan.
No. So the rear seats are actually, the front seats fold. They even remember their position, which is a novelty as well. And they actually fold them in any meaningful manner, which is a novelty as well. As they're quite easy to get into, the doors open quite wide. They're relatively long. They're not ridiculous. They're not unwieldy in parking spaces, but then the parking spaces here are so much bigger than the car, it does make life much easier.
You mean they've grown in the last 40 years, unlike ours?
Yeah, just big trucks and stuff. Yeah. I think they started off bigger, to be honest, because, think of some of the land yachts and stuff. So they probably haven't grown in the last 40 years.
Possibly not. No.
They just started from, as opposed to an Austin 1100, they're talking about a whatever Monte Carlo. Yeah. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, rear seats, lots of leg and shoulder room. Headroom is a bit tight, and you do tend to feel it's a little bit close to the glass of the hatch.
Okay,
but you do have cup holders, so hey. All is not lost. Well,
it's an American car. Surely the first thing that you count is the number of cup holders, and then you worry about things like doors, seats. Does it actually have a gear stick?
Four cup holders, 2 bottle holders. And it's a 5-seater. There's 2 Isofix seats in the rear and 3 3-point seat belts. The seats are quite sculpted. I mean, they're not ridiculous, but I still wouldn't fancy being in the middle because that's going to pop you even higher and make your head even closer to the glass. So let's just pretend there's 2 seats in the back, shall we? Despite the seatbelts. There is a transmission tunnel for the third passenger, by the way, so that makes it even less comfortable. Why is there a transmission tunnel in the front-wheel drive car? Because it's an all-wheel drive platform, which does make me start thinking about terrible things about how you could possibly swap out the entire transmission for something more interesting instead.
You do not have a support network.
Oh, I don't. No, it's not happening. It's not happening. But it might be possible if somebody did it. Lots of space in the front. Grippy, comfy seats. Look a lot like the seats from a Corolla T-Sport, but trimmed in a lighter colour. I suspect they are the same seats as you would find in a Corolla T-Sport, because I would almost put money on them having been built on or near the same production line. And they're great. You can do 8-hour journeys and stuff, and it's perfectly comfortable. It's really comfy and great in the T-Sport, so I'm never going to complain about that. Visibility is an issue.
Okay.
That shallow glass house, yeah, it's distinctive. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, the mirrors are neat and they have external indicatory bits on it and they look good. And that bold C-pillar really sort of defines the side of the car in the profile, and it also looks good. Sadly, none of them help you understand the surroundings of the car. Visibility, I find, is a constant challenge. I've no idea why it's quite so bad, other than those 3 points.
But the front end does drop off. You can't see the back.
It's very hard, yeah. And there's, but when we get
judging
to
where
technology,
everything is so tricky.
Judging where everything is, and judging where other vehicles are as well, because people are quite bad for sitting in your blind spot.
Oh, okay.
That's more the point. I mean, it is a pain in the butt to reverse park, but yeah. Similarly, judging where other vehicles are is tricky.
Okay.
As far as the dash, there's a clear but basic binnacle. You get speed, revs, and fuel in dials. Everything else, for example, temperature is a warning light, just like the Yaris T-Sport, to be perfectly honest. There's a trip computer. That counts as an odometer, 2 trip counters, miles per gallon in US miles, and an outside temperature in degrees Fahrenheit only. There is nothing you can do to change that to Celsius, despite the fact that the car was sold in Canada. Also with disease Fahrenheit. Yeah, that works too. Also with degrees Fahrenheit. I assume that it can show it. It's possible to change it, because then they might well have used that for the rest of the world outside of North America. But I can't work out how to, and nobody seems to know.
Okay.
Passenger gets a view of the large glove box and some vents. Center console canted round. It's kind of horizontal. It's quite nice. Canted round towards the driver. Vents at the top. There's a 6.1-inch color touchscreen with some buttons. Pioneer infotainment system. There was an optional nav module for it if you went for the premium audio. I still get a nav button, but it gets all German brand about this module is not installed type of thing on it. So it sort of tells you off for not having forked out a little bit more for that. Below the touchscreen are 3 familiar Toyota parts bin style knobs for direction, or air direction, fan speed, temperature, with buttons in the middle for aircon, recirc, heated rear screen. It is manual aircon, not automatic, but it still works well.
Okay.
Underneath that, the base, there's a slippery cubby hole of uselessness. It doesn't really restrain anything. There's no grippy dimples or anything. It's just a space in which I guess you could put something if you wanted to slide around a lot. It has a 12-volt socket in there. It also has the USB socket to plug into the stereo. Back from that, it's a gear lever, a pair of cup holders, handbrake, and a cubby or armrest.
Okay. You've described the outside. You've described the inside. So what's it like to actually drive?
Well, think about what you know about the other vehicles on this platform.
Yes.
Prius, Lexus CT. It's not a hardcore sports car.
I was going to say they're all renowned for extreme dynamism. Around racetracks, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely not.
But then again, you are in America, so...
I'm in America, so yes. Well, even then, there's not really been any way to test it out.
I was going to say, it's not so bad if it was...
Not up here. It's not a hardcore sports car. It is more of a GT cruiser. Mm-hmm. It is moderately happy around town, although some of the infrastructure around here is so blooming awful that it gets distinctly unhappy, but then as does anything short of, I don't know, suburban probably. The thing is, it was intended to be quick enough. Remember back to what the Scion was about, what the car was about. It was intended to be not embarrassingly slow, but not so fast that parents were put off buying them for little Trey as he goes to high school and stuff. So it was never meant to be hitting the 6s in the quarter mile and stuff. Mm. The engine itself, 2.5 litre inline 4. It's the same one. We've only really had it it's an engine we've only really had in Europe as part of hybrid drivetrains.
Okay.
So I mentioned the CT before. So if you had a CT250H, or some of the earlier Lexus NX hybrids, then you got this 2.5 litre inline 4 powering that. Powers 180 brake horsepower. For those of you who are paying attention at home, you'll go, 180, that's the same as the Corolla T-Sport was, and the 2ZZ. Never could there be two more different engines putting out the same horsepower. This is not a revvy car. The torque curve's pretty flat. There's little benefit to revving it. In fact, there's so little benefit to revving it that I had it about a month before I discovered there was actually variable valve timing, because it only kicks in, instead of in Europe, it kicks in at 2.5 to 2.75 thousand revs, certainly in the Yaris. Here, it kicks in at 4.25. And quite frankly, the car is just distinctly unhappy. It's happier now than it was when I bought it, actually, just through use. But it doesn't encourage revving that high. VVTi, I maybe get it kick in once a week, perhaps, these days.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not really worth it. It's totally and utterly different. So it's 180 horsepower, but quite a lot of torques, just stably right the way through. 6-speed manual is standard in the TC, in the TC2. But many cars had the optional 6-speed auto, which had a manual shift mode, flappy paddles, and rev matching on the downshifts. Yeah, I don't have one of those. On the other hand, 0 to 60 miles an hour is quoted as 6.5 seconds for the manual, 7.4 seconds for the auto. As I say, for the longer journeys, happy sitting on with traffic on interstates and highways. And sitting at traffic means sitting at European speed limits, and I don't mean British speed limits, generally, and it has enough poke to overtake, even in 6th, although you're better off shifting down to 5th or 4th.
Okay.
The gear shift is perfectly decent, I guess. It's a little bit clicky, but more use by someone who, actually has driven manual in the past, seems to have loosened up quite nicely. It's quite happy. There are very few canyons or tail of the dragon style roads around here. It is kind of flat. There is straight roads. There is woodlands, trees, and more ruddy trees. So I've not had much of a chance to drive it particularly hard. Some bushes, I guess, they're getting near replacement at 80,000 miles, but it still drives well. Generally goes where it's pointed now, since I invested in some registering quad-track all-season tyres. When I bought it, it came on some very elderly Chinesium winter tyres. which they were kind of round.
Okay.
And they were kind of on each corner, but that's the nicest I can say to them. In the damp, but they were quite squeaky bum, really.
Not in a good way.
No, not in a good way. So now there is far more stability, quite a lot more road holding. Once again, folks, I would remind you that tyres matter on cars. Had there been a choice in July, I would have chosen an auto if I was actually choosing a Scion TC, because there had been other choices, much as I always liked the Scion TC, by the way. It's not that I'm sort of somebody forced my arm up my back and said, you will buy this. You know, there are worse things I could have bought. I would have had the auto, better suit the engine, but also US road layouts. The four-way stop, as an idea, is just a total and utter menace. It's just grim. I've never seen a four-way stop. It wouldn't be better as a roundabout.
For the uninitiated, what is a four-way stop and what's the problem with them?
They are where there's a crossroads or a junction, and every single entrance to it has a stop sign.
Okay.
Because they don't really do give way or yield signs over here. It's almost always a stop sign, because why would that not help traffic flow? So trouble with a four-way stop is you're meant to come up and stop. And it's the person to your right who has priority right the way around. I think I'm right. No American knows. So it's just, I don't, So it's always the person to the right has the priority, or whoever arrived first and stuff. And then everybody has to stop, and then you stare at each other. And then nobody's really sure how they work. So then eventually one vehicle moves, and then eventually the next vehicle moves. Once it's kind of worked out, it's possibly them next. Whereas with a roundabout, of course, it's a give way sign on the entrance, so the traffic can keep on moving, can regulate speed on approach. You can see who's on the roundabout because they've got priority, and then you can regulate speeds. And even if it's one of those little dimples that we all grumble about in the UK because we don't know how good we've got it, they do keep the traffic moving. And that doesn't happen here. Obviously, in a manual, you've got to shift right down first gear again to move off, etc. In an auto, it's less of a pain because, of course, you just keep your foot on the brake and then you just lift off and move away, as opposed to having to sort of jiggle the gear stick. If you ever wonder why manuals don't sell over here and why they're not such a great idea, the four-way stop is a major part of that.
Okay.
The rest of the time, it doesn't really matter.
No, thank you for making us more culturally aware.
Something like that. This is the non-sweary version, by the way.
Yes.
So it's taken 6 months to get myself calm enough to get to the non-sweary version.
Well, while you're still not swearing then, take us to all the tech that is packed inside this car.
Okay, so this is a 7-year-old low-cost American car, generally speaking. And they've tried to put some other funky things in, which increase the cost. As a result, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, emergency brake warning, all these things, they don't exist. It doesn't have a reversing camera. It doesn't have any parking sensors, much to my disgust. It has no climate control. It has no sat-nav. Technology, no, not really. It does have a flipping excellent stereo, though. I was all ready to swap out the stereo for something with full-on CarPlay and spent $350 on that. In fact, I've even got a fitting kit for whenever I bought the stereo that was going to replace it. And then actually I used it a bit, and I used it a bit more, and I thought, this is really good. So it has a many speaker Pioneer stereo.
Okay.
That 6.1 inch display. It's got really good Bluetooth. It's reliable. On the occasions when I've had to use the phone function, people can hear me at the other end, and I can hear them.
Wow.
In a Toyota of a few years old. This is a novelty. All right. The Touch 2 and Go system in the GRMN has many good points. Its ability to connect to something via Bluetooth is not, and to then be audible both ways is not one of them. Yeah, when someone from Toyota phones you up and go, I can't hear you very well. It's like, well, I'm having to do, yes, I answered from the car, my car. And it's like, oh, okay then. There are many speakers inside it. There's a tweeter mid-range and some sort of larger bass style speaker in each front door. There are others scattered randomly around the interior. I'm not a particular music person, but it does have, you can listen to some pumping tunes. You can put through Mighty Car Mod's Too Sexy through it, and you can basically have all the, which was, a tune specifically written to try all these things and base in cars. And you can actually sort of make some of the interior panels rattle by turning it up, and still with decent sound quality. That's the amazing part. It's better than quite a few new cars, definitely better than any of my cars in the UK. There, but it's also nice and clear for podcasts, spoken media, which is a luxury as well, because again, the GRMN, not good for that. You can't really listen to podcasts on the GRMN. Just the harmonic, I don't know what it is. You just can't. Oh yeah, there's one last piece of tech. There is cruise control. It is manual, old school cruise control. I don't use it very much because it's the classic Toyota stalk hidden by the steering wheel setup, which is somewhere down by your right knee. Also, the traffic around here, if I'm going to and from work, traffic around here is quite busy. It's free flowing, but it's too busy for me to want to fiddle with cruise control, where I still don't really know which way. I don't know all the functions by touch.
Okay. Yep. Got that. Well, it really sort of brings us to the verdict. Now, you start off describing this and the process you've had to go through a little bit disappointed because of circumstances out of your control.
Oh, don't even talk. You see, you'll notice there's a couple of things I've skipped, like getting your US driving license and buying a car in the US of A, which is just the same hellscape you would imagine it to be.
But as you said, this is the non-sweary version. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have avoided certain topics. Mm-hmm. Verdict then. Now you've run it for a little while.
Yeah, and I had to run it for a little while. And it's a nice car. It is a nice car. It just passed 80,085 miles last week.
Look forward to the picture being in the show notes.
Well, yes, exactly. You'll censor it though. And you know what? It drives well. It's fine. It's all right. I just feel I had to pay too much money for it, but there was no choice at the time. That was just the market at that moment. But it's a decent car. It's a good car. Would it have sold in Europe? Probably not. It would have sold less than the 7th gen Celica, which came just before it. I mean, there is a muttering that TC stands for Toyota Celica is one of the things, that it would have been the next generation Celica. I don't think it would have sold well in the UK, but they got almost 500,000 sales here in the US, so they're obviously doing something right.
Yeah.
It's nice, it's comfortable, it's relatively economical. I get almost 30 UK to the gallon.
Okay, that's not bad.
I'll probably get slightly more, yeah. So it's not bad at all, and that's sort of motorway cruising around town. It's a nice car. It looks good, it drives relatively well enough for most folk. It's adequately quick, it's very comfortable, it's got lots of space. Whilst not being too big on the road or too showy, but respectable enough, because that was one of my aims whenever I bought a car over here. I couldn't just go out and buy a $2,000 Malibu or something with the wings falling off. There's a certain amount, of it had to be respectable enough. And it definitely hits, ticks all of those boxes. So yes, I like it. It's nice. I'm just bitter over the price, really. That's it. That's the worst I can come up with. And that was, you know what, when it was new, it was a flipping bargain. That's what I hate even more, was when it was new, it was a bargain.
Well, I'm glad you've got something that you, ignoring the price, but to use, you are relatively happy to.
Yeah. And I'm not actually driving as much as I did in the UK either. So it's not a big deal. Well, it's a bit of a big deal, to be honest. But it's not that big a big deal. We'll see. We'll see how long I keep it for. It's just, because of that high price, cost to change is a pain. That's what it boils down to.
All right,
okay. Anyway, on which happy note, I do quite like it. And I've repaired and done lots of little tweaky bits, like sorted where previous owners had painted stuff badly, and it has fewer squeaks than it did, and it has no squeaks anymore, actually, because I discovered all of those and sorted them and stuff like that.
Yeah, you have fettled a bit.
A little bit, but I've not upgraded. I've just fixed.
No, you've not gone Johnny the Heiress, but you've gone more Mercedes.
No, the only thing that's been changed away from standard is the aerial on the rear wing, which I replaced. Instead of the long one, which would poke my eye out reaching into the boot, I replaced it with a Honda S2000 one, which is the same thing as I've done on Johnny the Heiress. Johnny the Heiress and GRMN for aesthetic reasons, and then on the back of the NDMX5, again, similar reasons, so I don't poke my eye out when I'm reaching into the boot. So it's a kind of standard mod, but other than that, everything is standard.
Good.
Cool. Aside, don't forget But between now and next time you give us any feedback, share your thoughts on the show at Motoring Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and on the contact page of motoringpodcast.com, the hub of all our activities. Please don't forget to leave a review and rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or however your podcast app lets you do such a thing. Andrew, in the meantime, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me is via Twitter. If you search for Crack Windscreen, you should find me there. And Alan, if people would like to know even more about the Scion, or perhaps the joyous buying...
Oh, it's wonderful.
Nightmare. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you personally?
You can, it's best to use Twitter, really, where I'm at AJP Bradley. That's Bradley. We'll be back before very long, but until then, I've been Alan Bradley.
I've been Andrew Clues.
And safe motoring.